Well, hello, everyone. My name is Michael Kugelman. I am the director of the Wilson Center's South Asia Institute and deputy director of the Wilson Center's new Indo Pacific program. Thanks for tuning in. On June 4th, India announced the results of its national elections. The ruling BJP emerged as the victor, but it suffered a considerable setback as it did not win enough seats to gain an outright parliamentary majority. So, for the first time, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, now serving his third straight term, will be governing within a coalition. It's too early to pinpoint why the BJP did not do as well as many had expected, though analysts believe that the reasons might include voters' anxieties about economic stress, backlashes to some of Modi's policies and governance style, anti-incumbency, and the effective electoral tactics of the opposition. This discussion will focus on the implications of India's election results and what they may mean for the country moving forward. India's elections matter because India matters. It is the world's most populous country. It has the fifth largest economy. It boasts one of the most rapidly expanding tech sectors. It's a formal space power. And of course, it is a close and strategic partner of the United States. The Wilson Center is fortunate to have a deep bench of expertise, in great part because of its robust community of scholars and fellows. And so I'm delighted to be able to call on four past and present Wilson Fellows representing a wide range of views and expertise to discuss India's elections. Let me briefly introduce them. Dr. Venkateswaran Lokanathan served for nearly a decade in India's National Security Council Secretariat, a special unit under the National Security Advisor in the Prime Minister's office. He has served as director and associate professor at the School of International Cooperation, Security, and Strategic Languages at Rashtriya Raksha University. He's also held positions at Manipal University and St. Joseph's College, and he is currently a Wilson Center Global Fellow. Dr. Neeti Nair is professor of history at the University of Virginia with a focus on modern South Asia. She's the author of two books, Hurt Sentiments, Secularism and Belonging in South Asia, and Changing Homelands, Hindu Politics, and the Partition of India. She is currently a Wilson Center Global Fellow, and this fall she will be, for the second time, a Wilson Center Fellow. Ajay Shankar is a distinguished fellow at the Energy and Resources Institute, or TERI. His career in public service spanned over 45 years, mainly in the fields of industry, the power sector, and urban development. His contributions included crafting the stimulus packages that enabled India to make a rapid economic recovery after the global financial crisis of 2008. He also led the development of the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor project, and he helped spearhead power sector reforms, including the 2003 Electricity Act. He is a former Wilson Center Public Policy Fellow. And last but not least, Dr. Ajay Verghese is Associate Professor of Political Science at Middlebury College. His research interests include Indian politics, ethnic violence, historical legacies, and religion. He is the author of the book, The Colonial Origins of Ethnic Violence in India, and he is currently working on his second project, which looks at Hinduism and politics in India, and he is researching that latter project now as a current Wilson Center Fellow. So it's a great group of experts that we have with us, and we've got a lot to discuss. So let's go ahead and get started. And Neeti, we will start with you. Prime Minister Modi has never needed to govern within a coalition as Prime Minister or Chief Minister, but national governing coalitions are a big part of India's broader political history pre-2014. So can you tell us a bit about India's experience with coalition politics at the national level in the past?
Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. It's always good to be back at the Wilson Center. So India has had quite a long experience with coalition governments. The first coalition government that was formed at the national level was formed at the end of Indira Gandhi's emergency in 1977. That Janata Party government pulled in different ideological directions because it was composed of the right-wing Jan Sangh, the left-wing Socialist Party, and the pro-farmer Bharatiya Lok Dal. And we know it lasted less than 7 years. Since that failed experiment, India has had several other coalition governments at the national level, and they have performed much more coherently. The short-lived National Front government was followed by the Congress's P.V. Narasimha Rao-led coalition government in 1991 that spearheaded important economic reforms, opening up and liberalizing India's economy. It also lasted a full 5-year term. A series of short-lived experiments, including the United Front, eventually gave way to the BJP-led National Democratic Alliance led by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. That coalition saw a fair bit of melodrama from constituents of the alliance. It also pulled in different directions, but it adhered to a common minimum program. And on contentious issues, such as the Babri Masjid Ram Temple issue, constituent members of the NDA promised to abide by the final verdict of the courts. The coalition governments that followed, the United Progressive Alliance 1 and 2, both steered by the Congress Party, saw meaningful economic and welfare reforms as well as foreign policy achievements, including wide-ranging talks with Pakistan over Kashmir during UPA 1 and the agreement on sharing nuclear technology with the United States. So I would say that the record on coalition governments is that they have learned to manage differences, focus on a common minimum program, and avoid contentious issues.
Thanks for that, Neeti. And just to follow up, are there any notable lessons from this past history for now, for the present, as Prime Minister Modi embarks on his first experience leading a coalition?
So Prime Minister Modi has no experience working in a coalition government, either at the state level or at the national level. But we can see certain patterns emerging already, like his predecessors in NDA 1. The BJP has kept key portfolios, home, finance, external affairs. But what remains to be seen is to what extent the newly resized BJP will play down divisive Hindutva issues in the interests of forming a stable government that lasts 5 years.
Thank you. And we'll get into that issue a bit more shortly. I want to turn to you now, Ajay Verghese. Let's talk about the players in this new BJP coalition. There are quite a few players, but the two main BJP allies, the two largest ones, those that have the most seats within the coalition beyond the BJP, are two regional parties, the Telugu Desam Party, or TDP, which is largely based in Andhra Pradesh, and the Janata Dal United, the JDU, which is largely in Bihar. So tell us a bit about these two parties. What do they stand for? What are their main support bases, and what have been their experiences with the BJP in the past? And, of the other parties in the coalition, the smaller parties in the coalition, are there any that stand out that you think are worthy of particular attention?
Yeah, these are two really interesting parties. So the Telugu Desam Party is using academic speak, we would call it an ethnic party. And I would say their main plank is Telugu nationalism. So that's nationalism for the group of Indians that speak Telugu, which is one of the main South Indian languages. Like all regional parties, there's a kind of broad focus on development. And stop me if you've heard this before. Like a lot of Southern parties, it was founded by a movie star. Janata Dal United in Bihar, this is not an ethnic party in the same way. One of their main planks is also kind of a general focus on development. And also, one of the things they really stand for is being a secular party, which will be quite interesting working in the NDA coalition. So, part of their support base has been Muslims in Bihar. I think, one of the big similarities between these two parties, a few similarities. One is there's a big focus on kind of lower caste mobilization. And so these are parties that are really focused on one of the main things we see in India today is that, there are groups that are really being left behind as the country is developing. And so these are parties that try to focus on lower caste groups, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, OBCs. Neither party can be called a Hindu nationalist party, of course, ideologically quite different from Hindu nationalist parties. And I think what's most fascinating is both of them have a very, very checkered history of working with the BJP. Both of them have dumped the BJP several times in the past. And so if you look at Nitish Kumar, for example, the head of JDU, I mean, he was one of the initial founders of the India Alliance, right? And then he left. And so if you look at his history in Bihar, he's been with the BJP and against and with and against. And so as far as coalition partners, very, very, I would say, untrustworthy. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens in the NDA in the future. In terms of other parties, it's always interesting to look at the relationship between the BJP and the Shiv Sena, which is, of course, a regional party. Also, Hinduism has been a huge part of their platform. You would think, if you didn't know much about these parties, that they would get along. But of course, the BJP and Shiv Sena have had a lot of difficulties in the past. And so it'll be interesting to see their relationship as well.
Thanks for that, Ajay. And staying on this issue, broadly speaking, this is a coalition government. But what's striking about it is that it is dominated by the BJP to a great extent. Of the 72 ministers in the new government, about 85% are with the BJP. The great majority of cabinet ministers are with the BJP, and many of them held the same roles in Modi's second term. So there are a lot of familiar faces. So what do you think this means for the internal dynamics within the coalition and its parties? And we'll talk about implications for public policy in a bit. But right now, I'm curious to hear your take on what this might mean for the internal dynamics of the coalition itself.
Yeah, so a lot remains to be seen. As Neeti's pointed out, Prime Minister Modi doesn't have experience having to work with other parties in a coalition. So one of the things that I've been reading, for example, is members of the JDU have pointed out to the BJP that Nitish Kumar better be treated with respect, because he's a very important, he's kind of a kingmaker, and the head of the TDP, Chandrababu Naidu, is of course also. They're both kingmakers. So let's just look at the math, right? These two parties have 28 seats together. The BJP can only afford to lose 21, and then you'd still have the majority there. So the simple reality is, that's enough. Them withdrawing support would be enough to collapse the government. So Naidu and Nitish, the term I would use is they're kingmakers, and there's also rumors that, of course, the India Alliance would love to have them. And there were rumors that they said to Nitish Kumar, if you joined, you could be prime minister of our government. And we've kind of heard about him talked about as a prime minister as well. So the internal dynamics, I think, are going to be pretty complicated. It doesn't surprise me that the BJP has so many, important cabinet positions, but I'll mention one position that I think is going to be really important is the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. And that is something that the TDP and the JDU are really pushing for one of their allies to be in that spot. And the reason why is because of this anti-defection law. And so the speaker can disqualify members in cases of defection. And so I think the Telugu Desam party, the Nitish Kumar, they want to make sure that the speaker's post has one of their allies, and in case there are any MPs who might face disqualification over switching sides. So I think that's I'm interested to see what happens there. But the internal dynamics are definitely going to be quite fragmented.
Thank you for that, Ajay. And indeed, I think one of the important takeaways that we've already heard multiple times, but just a foot stomp again, it's very significant. This is really uncharted territory for Prime Minister Modi, in the sense that he has never had to govern within a coalition, which will present, I think, some inherent challenges, which we'll get to. So let's now turn to the issue of impacts on specific policies, the impacts of this new government, this new coalition government, on domestic and foreign policy. And we'll start with domestic policy. And Ajay Shankar, let's come to you now, because I'd like us to first focus on the economy. We know that over the last over a number of years, India's macroeconomic growth has been quite remarkable. But there still are a number of challenges, several of which I had cited before: inflation, unemployment, and so on. But broadly speaking, what do you expect to be the economic priorities of this third Modi term, especially when it comes to those inflation and unemployment issues? And also, do you have any early predictions of what the new government's first budget might look like?
Mr. Modi begins his third term, and he has 10 years of valuable experience as Prime Minister. And he has, from the outset, a self-perception of being a transformative leader and wanting to take India forward and make it a developed country. So for the last few years, he's been talking about India being a developed economy in 2047. And if you look at the Indian economy, post-COVID, the recovery has been reasonably robust. And so if you look at any number of macro factors, India would seem to be well poised to accelerate its growth and its development path. And Mr. Modi would like to put all his effort and energy into seeing that India really takes off. So I see him focusing a lot on taking advantages of all the strengths of India and making these 5 years transformative. I mean, assuming he does the full 5 years, transformative in terms of India's growth trajectory. When early on, there were sort of talk when he first came in this platform of development that he would be India's Deng Xiaoping. So this is a time where he could actually hope to achieve that ambition. But on the other hand, he's coming into office with serious structural challenges in the economy. So you mentioned inflation. Now, in inflation, going by Indian history and the history of previous governments, he has been politically smart in focusing on macroeconomic fundamentals to make sure that inflation doesn't reach very high levels. Now, that's very difficult in India. But nevertheless, given his decisions and the path he's followed, I think inflation control has been very important for him, and he's understood from his economic advisors what is needed to keep inflation low. So on balance, the track record of the last 10 years on inflation has been considerably better than that of the previous decades. Now, what he has faced in this election is a huge public opinion issue, which is responsible for his slightly poorer performance, is that the Indian economy has not been creating enough jobs. So we've had very high growth rates, but it's not been creating enough jobs, and especially for those who are in the lower down in the economic hierarchy. So the educated classes who are into the globalized economy, job creation, income generation has been pretty good. We are one of the fastest growing economies. But those at the lower end of the pyramid have not been seeing the job growth they need. Now, here India has a major problem because globally we've seen robots take over manufacturing. We are seeing AI coming. So in some ways, India is wanting to create jobs and needs to create lots of jobs through private investment in the economy, when the global technological landscape is not as favorable to job creation as it was 20, 30 years back. So that's a very serious challenge he has. But I think he will put in a lot of effort in devising policies to try and create jobs. Now, the political rhetoric so far has been on filling up jobs which are there in the government, vacancies in the government. And election promises have been made on those lines, but that's a short-term fix. And the real challenge is to get private investment into creating jobs. And here the Indian economy has a structural problem over decades. There's been sui generis or unique in not being able to take advantage of its large, low-wage, working class population and succeed in the global economy in terms of labor-intensive activity, labor-intensive manufacturing. That's a problem not only of the last 10 years, but of the last few decades. So I imagine he will make a lot of serious effort on redressing that and trying to get in private investment to create jobs in the labor-intensive areas where India could be a major player in the global economy and the global marketplace, and where it is not yet a significant player. But take something like garment exports. China's share of garment exports is higher than India's, though the wages are many times higher. So that's the kind of challenge he has to confront. And one other challenge, which is there in terms of increasing government debt and a higher fiscal deficit, I think certainly he would try to signal that he's serious about lowering the fiscal deficit and maintaining the macroeconomic stability that he has given India in terms of relatively low inflation rates, manageable current account deficit, and so on. So if I were to sum up, great effort in economic success and very difficult challenges.
Thank you. And staying with you here, Ajay, one of the big questions that have been posed by many observers since the election results were announced is, what do you think a coalition government might mean for economic reform prospects? What is your view? I mean, do you think that a reform agenda might be hampered, or is that a misplaced concern? And most economics-focused ministries in this new government, including finance, commerce, and industry, will be led by the same leaders that ran them during Modi's previous term. Is this good or bad for economic reform prospects? I know that foreign investors are very interested in this question about the impact of a coalition government on reform prospects. So I'd welcome your thoughts on this.
My sense is that there is continuity in the key ministries. And India's efforts at getting foreign direct investment and giving foreign investors the confidence that they need to invest to take the full advantage of the Quad of the China plus one approach, we will certainly see very serious effort and sustainable effort and credible efforts. On economic reforms, the one area where I think the compulsion of coalition politics may see the government choosing to go slow. And that is the area of privatization. Now, in our reform since 91, privatization has been on the table. Economic reformers and policymakers from outside have been advocating large-scale privatization. But for domestic political compulsions, progress has been very modest. So Mr. Modi and the government 2 years back had come up with a very aggressive program of privatization, and privatization by another name, which is asset monetization, the monetization of assets, which is another way of privatization. Now, in these two, I think the coalition politics may persuade Mr. Modi that pragmatic politics requires that he let it remain on the pole. On the code. And the reason why he would have to do it is something which may not be well understood in the rest of the world, and which is that India has made remarkable progress in terms of inclusive growth or social justice, or bringing up the earlier untouchable scheduled castes through the provision of reservations in government jobs and reservation in public sector undertakings. So in the election narrative, the fear was generated amongst large sections, especially by the parties opposed to Mr. Modi, that privatization of public sector undertakings would mean jobs going into private hands where reservations would disappear. So I think Mr. Modi may find it pragmatic not to pursue aggressive privatization. But even if aggressive privatization doesn't happen, India can still grow very fast and attract a lot of FDI and do very well in the domestic and the global economy, because it has done very well till date without any large-scale privatization. And disinvestment of shares and getting in professional management, etc., has been happening and could continue to happen. So the only area where I see a possible course correction, or not even a course correction, but not attempting to implement a decision taken earlier. Because in these last 2 years, Mr. Modi has chosen to not push privatization or asset monetization. But I also believe that these are not central to India moving into 8-10% growth trajectory and sustaining it for 20-30 years. I mean, this is, in a broader sense, marginal to succeeding economically. Because the private sector has moved into every area and is doing very well. I mean, whether it's power generation or managing ports or running airlines or telecom, etc., etc. So private entry is already a great success story. So that's what I see. The other area is that the government had passed some 4 laws amending the labor laws in India to bring labor market flexibility. But again, politics prevailed and those laws have not yet been implemented. And I think they may again have to be retweaked or implemented gradually. But again, those reforms have not come in the way of firms doing well or employing lots of people and doing well in the domestic and the global market. Apple is a very good example, a great success story. And Mr. Modi would like to get many more Apples to come to India and repeat what Apple has done, which is 25% of production is being exported and has become the second largest center for Apple for production outside China and is growing very fast. So Mr. Modi's effort would be to repeat the success story of Apple with many others.
Thank you for that. And just one more question before we move to the social agenda. So Ajay, you're a specialist on energy policy, and you referenced that a bit. But one of Modi's core policy priorities has long been to effect an energy transition, with an eventual goal down the road of becoming a net zero country. So where do you see India's energy policies going in this new government?
Again, I'd go back to the track record of the last 10 years. So when Mr. Modi came on the international stage, he cooperated with the United States in particular in getting the Paris Agreement through, and he disagreed with his policy establishment. So he was ahead of the curve. So the Paris Agreement happened. Then we made very ambitious commitments under Paris as our nationally determined contributions. These were again ahead of what his policy establishment felt should be done. We have overachieved our commitments under Paris already. And then at COP26, he surprised us and the whole world by making two major declarations. The most important one was that by 2030, we would have 500 gigawatts of fossil fuel electricity generating capacity and fossil fuel free generating capacity or non-fossil fuel capacity. And this was more than the total capacity existed in India in 21, 1.5 times that. And we are well on track on achieving that. And now, before the elections, he announced that for about 10 million households, he would be giving rooftop panels for solar generation. So I see him wanting to create a position for himself as a very responsible climate leader and moving aggressively towards net zero. And there is one dimension which I think an argument which some of us have made, and I think will get great attraction, that being a late mover, India has the advantage of being able to create green capacities, both in electricity as well as industry, at a lower cost because it does not have to wind down existing carbon emitting capacities. So if you want green steel, we don't make steel to export to Europe. So we can create green steel manufacturing capacity, gain competitive advantage and leapfrog. For China to do that, they have to close some existing plant and then build a fresh. Of course, they have deep pockets, they can do it and probably do it. But for India, this is a historic opportunity to leapfrog into a competitive green global economy. And I think Mr. Modi is beginning to see that and will probably push it. But the majority of voices in India are still in the earlier rhetoric that we have a right to develop, we have the right to burn coal, and development takes precedence over responsibility on climate. But today, fortunately, being responsible on climate gives us an opportunity to become globally competitive and at affordable costs. So that's the internal debate which will take place in India. And I think Mr. Modi will be on the right side of the progressive side of that discussion.
Well, thank you for that. Really interesting. Thanks, Ajay. So I now want to turn back to Neeti and then Ajay Verghese. Another question that's been getting ample play in recent days has been the potential impact of this coalition government on Modi's social agenda and really Hindu nationalism. Some of the coalition partners, including the two largest ones, don't share the ideological views of the BJP. I think, Ajay Verghese, you mentioned this earlier. So where do you see the Prime Minister going with this aspect of his domestic agenda in his third term? So Neeti, will come to you first, and then we'll go to Ajay Verghese.
Yeah, so I think, once the BJP comes down to analyzing the election results, I think they will realize that the anti-minority hate speech that was on display in the later phases of the elections, especially, really did not pay electoral dividends. And as numerous states go into election mode, campaigning mode over the next few months, they will have to factor this into their campaign strategy. And, even the RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat recently cautioned unnamed leaders of the BJP against overweening arrogance. So I think on divisive issues such as, converting medieval mosques into temples or imposing a Hindu-inflected uniform civil code, the BJP will be reined in by its alliance partners and by recognizing new electoral compulsions. On a sort of related note, I think these elections are going to, results have already led to a climate of less fear, more breathing room. And I think we should be prepared for even more brave investigative journalism in the next few years. And how Modi deals with such critical scrutiny, is he going to label it anti-national, or is he going to grow more tolerant and be willing to, let's say, engage in press conferences? I think that remains to be seen. And I think his strategy will reflect on his own sense of security and comfort as leader at the helm of a coalition government.
Thanks for that, Neeti. Ajay Verghese, you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, so I think, the basic answer I'll give you is that the Hindutva agenda is stalled with these coalition partners. I mean, the Telugu Desam Party, the JDU, they are not going to sign on to a lot of, as Neeti pointed out, a lot of the kind of core elements of the BJP agenda, the Hindutva, Hindu nationalist agenda. So, of course, the Uniform Civil Code, I think, is one question. That you got the Ram Temple, but of course, there are other temples that Hindu nationalists and those in the Sangh Parivar have talked about. People have pointed out, like, this in many ways was a shocking election result, the BJP really, not being able to get a majority. To me, probably the most shocking fact of the entire election was the loss of the Faizabad constituency, right? I mean, earlier this year, you had the prime minister, come and inaugurate this new temple, and this is something the BJP has talked about for over 40 years, and Hindu nationalists talked about much longer than that. And it was always one of the centerpieces of their agenda is to destroy the mosque and build this Ram temple. And so you did it, and then what was the immediate result is you lost this constituency by like 50,000 votes. And so that is really shocking. And the best example of how, Indian voters, as Neeti pointed out, really rejected this hate speech. And you saw that especially in the latter stages of the campaign, when there were some concerns turnout was going to be lower, or maybe, the BJP was not going to do as well as people. Then you saw more of this kind of anti-Muslim, anti-minority rhetoric. I think all of that is going to be stalled. I think, there's also the broader issue of we've seen, kind of a huge experiment that the BJP has been running for a while now, which is, can you take a society which is so divided by caste and try to paper over that difference using religion? And if you look at it, many of the SC and ST constituencies is where they fared the worst, right? And so I think you're going to see, and this is also the case with their coalition partners who have talked a lot about lower caste mobilization. They've said there are certain groups economically that have not done well. These are the lower caste groups, indigenous groups, and those are the constituencies where the BJP really fared poorly. So identity politics is, really did not work in this election. Trying to paper over caste differences with religion didn't work here. So then what's left, I think, is 2019, this and this election as well. You saw a lot of focus on the Hindutva agenda. I think what you're going to see in the future, if I can make a prediction, is going back to 2014. I mean, what was the main thing that you heard in 2014? The main word was vikas, right? The development, right? That was the whole initial agenda that Modi has done the argument has done a terrific job as chief minister of Gujarat. This is the Gujarat model, and so then he's going to shepherd the Indian economy into the future. And so I think that since the social agenda is stalled, you'll see a lot more focus on, hopefully, a lot more focus on economic issues, which are much less, are not going to lead to the kind of violence or toward minorities that we've seen in the past. And that's something that the coalition partners, I think, can sign on to as a more inclusive kind of development model. So I think that's what we'll see.
Well, thank you for that, Ajay, and Neeti as well. So Venkat, you've been very patient. We're going to come to you now. We're going to talk about the implications of the election results for foreign policy issues. And so my first question to you here is, what do we know of the key coalition partners' views of foreign policy, if any? And will working within a coalition have any notable impact on how the prime minister pursues his foreign policy?
Thank you, Michael. Since we're discussing about coalition politics here, any election is a battle of narratives. And on coalition politics, I just wanted to add in 3 very quick points for all of us to consider. The National Democratic Alliance was formed nearly 30 years ago in 1998. It has been in power for 15 out of those almost 30 years. So it's not always been in power, but the coalition has existed, even when it was in opposition. Second, the NDA had 20 coalition partners in 1998, and it's now gone beyond 30 in 2024. So that's the second point that I want to highlight. The third point is all the coalition partners that we've spoken about, our fellow panelists have detailed it really well, have all been part of the NDA from 1998. A quick fact, the JDU of Mr. Kumar has not fought in the NDA between 1998 and 2024, only in the 2014 elections. And that election, primarily why Mr. Kumar did not fight was because he did not want Prime Minister Modi to be a prime ministerial candidate, obviously because of the 2002 riots. But if you look at what happened recently in the last few days in the NDA parliamentary board meeting, you had Mr. Kumar making his brief remarks endorsing the prime minister and almost cajoling him to provide Bihar with a special category status, special category. And then he goes on quickly to actually go and almost touch his feet, which Prime Minister Modi actually stops him from doing. So let's just put that point in perspective also. With Mr. Naidu, he's again been one of the original partners of the coalition politics since 1998. He didn't fight with the NDA in the 2009 and 2019 elections. But by and large, Mr. Naidu's grouse has been largely economic. And so I think that is something that should be considered by the BJP when they work together. So I think when this perspective of the impact of coalition politics is discussed, we must keep these factors in mind before we actually look at would coalition politics really impact, because I think Prime Minister Modi is a very seasoned politician. And all these leaders that we're talking about are pretty much in the same age group. So I don't foresee a lack of experience. I don't foresee any problems moving ahead because a lot of these people have been together earlier. Now, as far as the impact on foreign policy is concerned, again, the popular perception, of course, is because the TDP has got 16 seats and, the state of Andhra Pradesh is important. But there are 3 coalition partners in Bihar. So you've got 18 seats there, 12 for the JDU, 5 for Mr. Chirag Paswan, and 1 for the HAM. So Bihar becomes an extremely important state that the BJP has to take into consideration along with Andhra Pradesh. And then the third would be Mr. Eknath Shinde and coalition in Maharashtra. Now, let's just very quickly look at these 3 states. Andhra Pradesh has over 1.2 million people of the part of Indian diaspora in the US. There's a lot of skilled workers from Andhra Pradesh that are in the US. There is a lot of youth students, as well as those who are actually doing a lot of courses and technical courses and biosciences that are in the US. Both of these constituencies are very important for Mr. Naidu. Mr. Naidu has a track record of being development driven. He believes in the extensive use of technology. 20 years back, 25 years back, he set up what was known as the high-tech city in Hyderabad. I expect him to continue to focus on developing the new capital, which he has declared as Amravati in Andhra Pradesh. So he would need, finance, he would need infrastructure, he would need connectivity, and all of this would need investments. So my sense is that the chief minister, who's a very seasoned politician in his fourth term as the chief minister of the state, is going to support any focus on foreign policy, because I think that's something that his state requires. Let's come to Bihar. A significant number of the Bihar origin diaspora is actually in many key island countries, Mauritius and Seychelles, to name two. And this is a key component of India's Sagar initiative that the Prime Minister had launched. Just to give you an example of how states can actually, the priorities of the states can enmesh into foreign policy. Fiji is another example where you have a significant Bihar, diaspora, and India has been reaching out to the Pacific Island nations. We've seen recently the landslide in Papua New Guinea, and India has been quick to rush aid there. South Africa, another key country where you have a lot of people from Bihar origin, part of the BRICS. Africa outreach is very important for India. As you know, they brought in the Africa Union into the G20, and of course, the Caribbean islands. So these are all very important places where you have significant Bihar origin people. And especially in Mauritius and Seychelles, you have people who are in fairly politically influential positions. And hence, somebody like a Nitish Kumar, in fact, I'm sure some of you would have observed in January 2021, Chief Minister Kumar actually did his first outreach to Bihar origin diaspora in the US. And so he, again, is a very seasoned politician. He's been a chief minister for the last 18 years. And majority of those 18 years, his partner in the state has been the BJP. Of course, he's done a bit of back and forth, but the fact is that for majority of those 18 years, this is his 9th term as chief minister. So I expect, there are 500,000 Bihar origin people in Bangladesh. There's 1 million Bihar origin people in Pakistan, for example. So, I would expect that a lot of these states, Chief Minister Nitish Kumar has done 18 years as chief minister. I think he's now looking for legacy, So development would be a key for him. Bringing in investments would be key for him. And so I don't expect Bihar, like Andhra Pradesh, to actually push back on any kind of foreign policy interactions. Let me come to Maharashtra. Of course, we all know it's the financial capital, economic hub, extremely industrialized state. Investment is extremely important for this coastal state. There are 7 million origin diaspora in many of the island countries, like in the case of Bihar. So again, outreach to the diaspora is something that will be very important for them. Both Bihar and Maharashtra are going to elections, at the end of the year. And so I expect that development is something that they're going to actually focus a lot more on. And I don't expect any pushback when it comes to foreign policy. And just one final point, which I could possibly touch on if time permits, is the entire foreign policy team, I'm talking at a political level, of the current government is completely from the BJP. I'll stop there.
Well, thanks, Venkat. That's a really important story that you shared there about the diaspora issue and how that plays into foreign policy with the coalition partner. So thanks for highlighting that. But yeah, I guess I may want to pick up where you just left off. Looking at this issue of foreign policy in a broader context, what do you see as the biggest foreign policy priorities in this Modi third term? Do you envision continuity with this previous term, or do you expect something different? And on a related note, I can't help but ask, what does the Prime Minister mean when he speaks of India as a Vishwa Guru for the world? This is a theme that we've heard more and more over the last few months. So if you could shed some light on that as well.
Yeah, so I'll take the second part of your initial question, which is on continuity. Look, one of the things that the Prime Minister has done is bring in career practitioners into political positions for both foreign policy and national security, right? So you've got a Mr. Jay Shankar and then Mr. Ajay Doval, who are both career practitioners, extremely skilled practitioners in their respective fields, who are occupying cabinet rank positions and advising Prime Minister Modi. So that's one point that you have to keep in mind. I expect professionalism to be the norm. Look at how we've handled the Maldives issue recently, right? There was some comments that were made by a few ministers of the Muizu government against the Prime Minister, and you saw that there was a very emotional and political reaction to that by some of the supporters of Prime Minister. But when the Muizu government wanted Indian military presence to be decreased in Maldives, you did not see that kind of a reaction, and you can see that India is handling that fairly, in a balanced manner. And we're not seeing a lot of hue and cry taking place there. We've actually pretty much agreed with the Maldives. Look at the case of, for example, with what's happening with Canada and the US on the Niger case and the Panoon case. Again, you don't see a lot of hue and cry happening domestically here in India. You don't see a lot of extreme statements coming out of the government. And they're being very professional about it. So I expect a certain degree of professionalism. I expect continuity in foreign policy. There'll be tough diplomatic posturing based on what they're calling the Bharat First, which basically means they're looking after national interest. They'll continue to espouse that they're an important global voice. And this is very important for them because of what Mr. Shankar, for example, mentioned, the goal of Viksit Bharat in 2047, which is essentially developed India. The reforms of global governance is going to be another very important issue. Occupying a leadership or influential role in the global south, extremely important. And I think this is also connected to the point on Vishwa Guru that the Prime Minister talks about, or what Jay Shankar says is Vishwa Bandhu. So both of these are complementary, and I'll explain this a little more. There was a mention again by Mr. Shankar on climate change. I think that's going to be an extremely critical issue. And terrorism, which is another important issue that I think we are going to continue to speak about. Jay Shankar met with all the incoming neighboring countries' leaders before even the formal announcement of the cabinet positions. So that's how important he is in the scheme of things. And NSA Sullivan is actually coming to visit on 18 June. So quick, almost less than 10 days since the inauguration has taken place. And very clearly is coming to meet his counterpart, which is NSA Doval. So these are two very important key players in the current scheme of things. The key question, I think, will be, will India up it a notch or ramp up whatever they've been doing in the last two terms? I think that is something that will be very interesting to look at. Would it mean a more active role in global crisis resolution, let's say in Ukraine and Gaza? I don't foresee this in the next year or two because of a number of domestic preoccupations. While there's no doubt that Prime Minister Modi has the experience of coalition politics, but it's very unlike the fact that he doesn't have leeway when it comes to coalition partners, like in the case of when he let go of his coalition partner in Punjab over the farm laws in the previous government. He cannot afford to do that. And I think we are already seeing that in terms of some discussion taking place on a very important policy of defense reforms, which is on Agniveer, which again I can touch upon later on. So there are domestic preoccupations, trying to build consensus with coalition partners on very, very important issues like the Uniform Civil Code, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and the National Register of Citizens. I said Agniveer, one nation, one poll. I think these are all important issues that there'll be a lot of back and forth that's going to take place. between the coalition partners. There is no doubt that over the next year or two, they're going to take a very hard look at the performance of the party itself. You're going to have a new president of the party. And if you look at how they seem to have, I mean, they seem to have lost a lot of votes in very important states. So I think there's going to be a very hard look on that, and that's going to be a priority. The focus is going to be on financial allocation and equitable economic development. And that's where I think I agree with what Mr. Shankar has said. I think that's going to be extremely important when it comes to driving the domestic agenda. On the international front too, I think India's role as a mediator or playing a more proactive role in the next year or two is going to actually not be very conducive. 65 countries, according to some statistics, are going to elections over 2024. We have the EU going to, I mean, EU is currently having its elections. The US is going to have its elections. We've just finished our elections. Nearly 50% of the world population is actually, busy voting. So as governments are trying to defend their records and get re-elected, and as new governments come in and trying to settle down, I don't expect too much to happen other than what's been happening usually over the next year or two. Having said that, to come to the latter half of your question on foreign policy priorities, I mean, we could talk on this endlessly, but I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible and highlight 4 issues. And I'm going to leave out China and Pakistan because I suppose you're going to have a question on that later on. But essentially, I think if you look at the foreign policy team, the political team in the MEA, you'll see that there is a very interesting change that has taken place at the level of the Minister of State. We've got 2 Minister of States that have joined Jai Shankar, both from the BJP. And one of them, Mr. Kirti Vardhan Singh, is from a place called Gonda in Uttar Pradesh, which is just about 90 kilometers from the Nepal border. So here is a very seasoned politician who's been, fighting elections and who's been in the thick scheme of things. Again, someone who is an environmental activist. So this point that Mr. Shankar made about climate change being very important, I expect MEA to actually drive a lot of that, and the MOS actually is, he's an activist who's been on the ground. So that's one thing. The other MOS is Pabitra Margareta. Now, Pabitra Margareta is again a BJP politician, and he's from a place called Kamrup in Assam. Now, this is at equidistance from onto the north, the Bhutan border, not very far away from the Chumbi Valley and the Siliguri corridor, and to the south, Bangladesh, which is another very important area. So you can clearly see that neighborhood first is going to be an extremely important priority for the current government. I think possibly the most important priority for the current government. The Foreign Secretary, Vinay Quatra, is expected to retire in October. And there are whispers that the current Deputy NSA Strategic Affairs, my former boss, is going to take over as Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri. Vikram Misri is been the ambassador to Bhutan and China. Again, somebody who understands the neighborhood really well. So I expect a lot of focus on the neighborhood. Interestingly, I think that there is a very clear delineation that's happening between foreign policy and national security within this current government. The fact that Vikram Misri has spent considerable time at the Secretariat as the Deputy National Security Advisor, and then if he's taking over as the Foreign Secretary, would mean, and I could be wrong, but it's just a point I want you to consider and track, that security issues on bilateral relations, let's say, for example, negotiations on the line of actual control, or the border issue with Nepal, or for that matter with Pakistan, all of this, I think the MEA is going to take care of the dialogue and the diplomacy. So you have the NSA, who's a special representative on the LAC talks. Don't be surprised if you see after a point of time the MEA actually coming in and taking that over. And this is something I think there's been a fair amount of discussion with the security establishment. In the last few years, I don't see a lot of news out there about the NSA. As compared to the previous 2 terms, when there was a lot of news in the media about the NSA, about how he was India's James Bond, and there was a lot of information out there trying to create this persona, right? But in the last few years, I haven't seen too much coming out on the NSA. So I think I think they're taking a back seat and focusing on more critical areas, which I'll probably detail if I have time later. But the MEA would possibly be taking over a lot more proactively, taking over diplomacy and dialogue on key negotiations with external countries. So that's a point that I'd like you to keep in mind. The second priority, I would say, is the Sagar initiative, which I just briefly mentioned about. The Indian Ocean region is extremely important for India. We can see that China, of course, is a concern, and the Chinese have been increasingly present in these regions. Protecting the vital slogs has become extremely important for India. So I expect a lot of focus on the Indian Ocean region, and corresponding to that, also focus on the Indo-Pacific. And so the Quad becomes very important. So the regional partners in the Quad, that is Australia and Japan, are going to be key countries. Foreign Minister Jay Shankar is a big proponent of, if there is pressure on land, you have to try and ease it through pressure on the sea. So if there's going to be pressure in the LAC, then you will start seeing, a lot more involvement and possibly a lot more involvement with the Quad and the Indo-Pacific. That's something that I foresee them to move forward with. Philippines and Vietnam is another two important very countries. We've been doing a lot of work with them on defense exports. Both these countries have significant challenges with China. So I expect these four countries to be extremely important. The Link West policy, again, is something that is extremely important for India. Fascinatingly, the petroleum minister is, again, a diplomat, a very seasoned, experienced diplomat, Mr. Hardeep Puri. So, energy interests, I see, at least in the short term, a lot of it coming from outside. So negotiations with Russia, with Gulf countries, with what we call West Asia and you call Middle East, those are going to be extremely important to ensure that the focus is going to be on ensuring resilient supply chains. I think that will be very important. Connectivity is going to be extremely important as part of Link West. So the international North-South transport corridor and the India-Middle East-Europe corridor, I think, are two focus areas for this government. I see an uptake. I see a uptake in relations or engagement with European Union countries, because what you're seeing in EU now is a lot of the far right or the center right actually gaining prominence in many of the elections, and this may actually work in favor, at least in terms of ideological convergences, especially if you see on concerns in Europe over China and concerns over illegal immigration. I think these are all issues that you will see find resonance with the BJP government in India. So you will see some increased engagement happening there with countries like, whether it's Germany, Italy, France, and depending on how the elections go with UK. Finally, of course, the focus on plurilateralism. I think that is going to be extremely important. I see India focusing a lot on BIMSTEC. I see them focusing a lot on the Indian Ocean Rim Association. I see them focusing a lot on Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, the framework. I see them focusing a lot on the Sri Lanka, Mauritius trilateral framework, and also the I2U2, of which the US is a partner. And at the same time, they would also be focusing on the BRICS, the SCO, and also the RIC, because you're trying to look at engaging with all partners. So broadly, I would say these are the four major priority areas. Now, very quickly on the Vishwa Guru and Vishwa Bandhu point, essentially, Prime Minister Modi's goal is to achieve Viksit Bharat by 2047. And what that essentially means is increased access to resources, markets, technologies, and best practices. So how is he going to achieve that? And to achieve that, it becomes very important that there is a global outreach that takes place. How do you carry partners who have divergent views with each other? I think that becomes very critical. How do you ensure connectivity across borders to ensure that there is resilient supply chains? How do you create a global workplace for skilled and talent from India? So you've got a lot of mobility agreements taking place, for example, with the European countries, with Australia, Japan, and many more. How do you do intensive engagement on basic needs, critical infrastructure, defense, research, design, and innovation? I think that is going to be critical. And how do you expand manufacturing, critical and effective technologies, and effective diplomacy for international collaboration? So essentially what you see is this concept of Vishwa Guru or Vishwa Bandhu is for India to, this is not a concept for India to try and teach the world. I think there's been a misconception, but it's more about the unique experiences that India has had, the civilizational linkages India has, the cultural diversity that India has, and what is it that the world could learn from India. I think that's the point. Look at our democratic system. We've had single majority governments for almost 49 years, and we have had coalition governments for 33 years. So it's a fair balance. So the electorate is quite smart in that sense. And hence, I think these are, how elections are conducted, for example. I think these are points that, we want to share best practices with the rest of the world. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for that. So it's like this idea of projecting an Indian exceptionalism, perhaps. So thank you for that. Really, really very interesting, very substantive. Very quickly, though, in Washington, India's relationships with three countries are going to be particularly significant and a lot of interest: China, Pakistan, and of course the US. So if you could very briefly just tell us what you expect the new government's initial goals to be for its relations with Beijing, Islamabad, and Washington, and especially Washington.
Yeah, so let me start with Beijing, which is definitely the most significant challenge from a foreign policy and national security perspective. I think India is going to continue to push for status quo ante on the border before there is normalization of relations. So in that sense, you could say that the relationship has gone back to the time between 1962 and 1978, when the border issues were actually quite predominant over the rest of the bilateral relations. You will definitely see more enhancement of border infrastructure along the LAC, because this is also one way to ensure connectivity to many of the border states. You have Ladakh, which is a union territory that's under the central government. You have Sikkim, where the BJP is a coalition, in government. And then you have Arunachal Pradesh, where the BJP has just come back for the third straight time. So these are all important coastal states. These are all important border states. And hence, border infrastructure along the LAC is going to be something that's very important. As I mentioned earlier, and I'd like to reiterate, I think freedom of navigation and open seas is going to be an important priority, especially because what happens in the Indo-Pacific is going to influence the Indian Ocean region. So I expect India to be a lot more, present in the maritime domain. As far as Pakistan is concerned, I think there'll be more of the reiteration of ending terror for talks to begin. I would not rule out, because we are here talking about the next 5 years, we should not rule out the possibility of back channels, especially with the Sharifs having come to power. So maybe there won't be a dialogue upfront that's going to take place, but one should not be surprised if there are back channels. This government has been involved in back channels with Pakistan in the previous times. There's been some talk of getting back Pakistan-occupied Kashmir from very important cabinet ministers. I'm not quite sure whether they're expecting the region to be restive and to demand foreign integration with India. I would much rather say a more sustained diplomatic campaign that actually focuses more on some of the historical facts would do a great deal in trying to actually put more pressure on Pakistan, especially when it's on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. I'm only going to say that much because this is a presentation in itself. On the US, I think the fact that we are going to have challenges when it comes to defense equipments, technology coming in from Russia, a traditional partner, and Israel, who's been very important in the last 3 decades because of the preoccupation of their preoccupation with the conflict, would mean that the United States becomes a very important partner, especially on critical technologies, especially on defense, with the foundation agreements having been signed. So I expect defense technology to be focus areas. The Prime Minister has spoken about using AI very extensively to achieve Viksit Bharat. So I think again, there is a resonance in terms of what he's talking about. So I expect that the relations with the US will be majorly focused on defense technology and also on the Quad and Indo-Pacific, as long as things are boiling up in the LAC. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Venkat. Really interesting. I'd like to wrap up with one more question, unless anyone first would like to respond to anything anyone else has said. If you'd like to do that, please feel free to unmute. If not,
I would make
yes, please.
One minor comment, which is that Mr. Modi has ruled for 22 years, 10 years as chief minister, or 20 years, 10 years as chief minister and 10 years as prime minister. But he has had complete authority politically as well as administratively over the governments he's run. So for the first time, he is going to be running a coalition government. So one expectation is that he's a seasoned politician and he would be as flexible as is needed politically. But there is the other side to it, that can he re-engineer himself to be a little more accommodating in the way he governs? So that's one issue which I thought is worth flagging.
Could I just add in something to what he said? There is a politician called Ramdas Atavale from the Republican Party of India, right? Now, he is also someone who's considered to be quite, he tends to go where the wind blows. Now, he's been with the government for the last few years, and he's not been politically very significant, but it's been a cabinet minister. So I think, again, an insignificant coalition partner, who may not bring in the political votes, but he is stuck with the government and fairly well respected. He continues to be a coalition partner with the government.
Thanks for that, Venkat. So this has been a great discussion, really interesting. All 4 of you have made some really important points on a range of issues. But we do need to wrap up. But the last question I would ask to anyone that would like to address it, I guess it takes us back full circle to the election and its implications. There's been a lot of talk in recent months, really in recent years, about Indian democracy. So I thought I would just ask you all, whoever would like to respond, what do you think India's election and the way it played out and the election result, what do you think that this all means for Indian democracy? Would anyone like to say a few words on that?
Sure. I mean, this has been an election state by state, constituency by constituency, and the average voter has demonstrated his commitment to democracy, to the power of the vote, and to the whole political contestation that democracy involves. So this election is a resounding affirmation of the strength of Indian democracy at the grassroots and across the country.
Thank you. Neeti, did you want to say, you're unmuted? Please.
Yeah, I agree with what Ajay Shankar just said, but I also want to add that one of the first events I attended at the Wilson Center, the political scientist Ali Riaz from Bangladesh had said, the only export we want from India is the Election Commission. And I don't think he would say the same in 2024. And I think we really need to introspect about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Venkat?
I think, all this narrative that's been going on about questioning the election commission and the electronic voting machines, all of that is buried in the sand once the elections have happened. That's one. The second is that from whatever statistics is thrown out, there's been about an average of 66% votes cast by eligible voters. And of majority of this has been people from the rural areas, the economically less affluent, and also the a lot of these, especially in terms of caste backward classes and castes. This was a little unlike the 2019 elections where a lot of the middle class came out to vote, largely possibly influenced by what was happening in the debates that was taking place on news channels. And there was a lot of resurgence in nationalism in terms of the surgical strikes that had taken place in Pakistan and across the Myanmar border. I think a lot of the 34% of this population that did not vote were largely from the middle class. And I think that impacted the BJP very significantly, because this is that particular section that actually gets quite influenced by what happens in news channels and especially by foreign policy issues and national security issues. So I think that is a key point that one must also keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Ajay Verghese.
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is, if Modi, I mean, clearly he, will be prime minister a third time, but if the BJP had won another majority government, didn't need coalition partners, what would have happened, right? And I think all of the things that people have worried about with Indian democracy, right? The huge amount of money, huge financial advantage, electoral bonds, all of that's changed a little bit, but the concern about how much more money the BJP has than its opponents, the concerns over the position of leader of opposition, the concerns over like Neeti mentioned, the Electoral Commission, the Supreme Court, concerns about tax raids, concerns about jailing opposition members, defamation cases, all of these things. All of that probably would have gotten worse, right? Because then all of that you would have had a mandate for to continue a lot of those things. So the fact that the BJP doesn't have a majority now and has coalition partners who will probably put the clamps on some of these things tells me that we don't know to what extent voters were they have a lot of concerns, right? So you can't say that they were necessarily rejecting all of that, but I think that if your question is what happens to Indian democracy, there's still a lot of time to change things that were trending in the wrong direction, and I think that's what we'll see over the next 5 years.
Thank you, Ajay. And on the issue of the election commission, it is notable, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 2 former chief election commissioners in India have both said that there's reason to be concerned about various aspects of the election commission. But this is obviously a debate that deserves more attention. But we do need to wrap up. This has been a terrific conversation. I want to thank Dr. Venkat Lokanathan, Dr. Neeti Nair, Dr. Ajay Verghese, as well as Ajay Shankar. You all have very different areas of focus, so some different views, but you all came together very well to discuss a lot of important issues related to the Indian election results and the implications for policy. So really want to thank you all for joining me, and thank you for those that are tuning in. Please stay tuned. Both the Wilson Center South Asia Institute and its Indo-Pacific program will be producing a series of content on India in the coming weeks and months. So please stay tuned. Please track our various websites and our social media accounts. There'll be a lot more to come. But with that, thank you all, and have a good day.